I am Maria Sanders, 29, a sales representative, and this is one of those family revenge stories that don't start with anger, but with loss. I buried my husband, Ethan, yesterday. I came home expecting silence, grief, and memories, not a hostile takeover. Yet, like many family revenge stories, mine began when the people I trusted most turned my pain into property. My mother-in-law's crew labeled our life for disposal. Our wedding photos sat in a box, tossed aside. The grief hardened, the kind only family revenge stories are born from. Howard Cole stood in the doorway, cold and certain. Family legacy must be returned to the bloodline, girl. Your tour of duty here is over. That was the moment I realized, some family revenge stories don't seek justice. They demand transformation. I came from humble roots, the kind where you earn your way into every room. My title, National Sales Representative. My skill, I could sell ice to an Alaskan. I didn't inherit respect, I built it, cold call by cold call. That work ethic was my first, truest inheritance. Then I met Ethan Cole. He wasn't the arrogant heir, he was gentle, ambitious, and genuinely loyal. He saw my grit, not my bank account. He was my emotional refuge from the rigid world of the Cole dynasty. He made me believe we could build a life separate from their rules. We were two parts of a whole, united by shared ambition and the naive hope that love was enough to withstand a dynasty. The Coles were not just wealthy, they were a dynasty. Howard, the patriarch, ruled their corporate empire with a fist hidden by velvet. Eleanor, his wife, was all icy elegance, her venom disguised beneath a perfect smile. They defined the peak of inherited arrogance. And then there were the sons, Christopher and David, groomed to inherit, not to earn. The salesgirl was tolerated, never truly embraced into the bloodline. My work ethic, built from hard knocks, contrasted violently with their sense of entitlement. They saw my hustle as undignified. Every dinner was a quiet audition. I learned their silent rules: speak when spoken to, praise the Cole name, and never mention my commission checks. Ethan's presence was the only shield, but even he couldn't deflect the constant, subtle microaggressions. I was tolerated because I was married to Ethan. That was the price of entry, but even in my vulnerability, I held one truth: my value was self-determined. The question wasn't if they would try to break me, but how long I could endure their judgment before snapping back. My first Christmas dinner. The table was exquisite, the atmosphere, a polite interrogation room. Eleanor started with the appetizers, and my career. She disguised cruelty under charm, asking, "Tell me, Maria, your marketing job, doesn't it lack a certain dignity?" Dignity. She meant money they didn't give me. I smiled, ready with my practiced, professional response. But Ethan beat me to it. Under the table, his hand found mine, a silent signal. "I see you, don't rise to the bait." That one squeeze was my silent anchor in a sea of arrogance. The passive aggression didn't stop at Christmas. Over time, Eleanor's remarks sharpened, cutting deeper. She started openly belittling my working-class background. Once, she referred to my hometown as charming, if a bit basic. It wasn't a compliment, it was a precision strike. I always checked Howard's reaction. He never intervened. His silence wasn't neutrality, it was a signal of cold, calculated approval. I realized they weren't just testing me, they were testing Ethan. They were waiting for him to admit he'd married beneath his station. That's when the early red flags turned into flashing alarms. I understood that this house, this dynasty, didn't demand harmony or love. It demanded submission. It demanded I stop being Maria, the self-made woman, and become the quiet, grateful wife. The truth settled in. I was profoundly lonely here. I knew then that if Ethan was gone, they wouldn't just exclude me, they would erase me. I won the National Sales Performance Award. It was validation for years of relentless work. I genuinely thought this tangible success would earn their respect, or at least a nod. At the next dinner, I mentioned the award. The response? Silent, perfectly timed sips of wine. Howard finally broke the silence, not with praise, but with a sneer. He glanced around the table, she sells dreams on commission, Eleanor. We own the infrastructure. It was a dismissal of my entire professional life, a reminder that in their eyes, my earned wealth was disposable. Later, Ethan was distraught. He always apologized, saying, they shouldn't have done that. But his apology was for their behavior, not a promise to truly confront them. The silent divide between us and the Coles grew wider. I realized that my success was their threat, but why was Ethan still unable to choose sides? I retreated to the living room, my spirit bruised by the cold dinner. My victories felt worthless under their scrutiny. Ethan came in, not apologizing this time, but simply being there. He knew their silence hurt more than any loud argument. He took my hand, not the defensive squeeze from under the table, but a reassuring hold. He looked me in the eyes and delivered the truth. Ethan said, they fear you because you've built what they only inherited. That one sentence was a lifeline. His words cut through the noise of their arrogance. He didn't just love me, he understood the political threat I posed to his family. For Maria, the self-made sales representative, that validation became her anchor, the only thing holding her in the rigid Cole world. I relied on him completely to buffer me from their venom. He was my shield. The terrifying thought was this: what happens when the shield is gone? His support was all I had, which meant the Coles knew exactly what they had to target to truly break me. It was a regular Tuesday. Then, a crushing pain, a gasp, and a sudden silence that swallowed the world. Ethan died of cardiac arrest. I went numb. The emergency room became a sterile blur. The truth was simple, brutal. My shield was gone. The funeral was a show, a Cole family performance of grief. Eleanor shed calculated tears. Howard maintained his stoic mask. I barely noticed them. My focus was the closed casket, the finality of it. My own grief was too pure to mingle with their theater, but before the last hymns had faded, Howard seized his moment. He cornered me, his voice a low, inappropriate growl. Maria, he whispered, eyes on the priest, not me. We need to discuss the family trust. It requires immediate attention. Not comfort. Not condolence. Business. That's when the grief cracked. I saw the pure, unadulterated greed in his eyes. Barely hours after burying his son, the Cole dynasty wasn't waiting for the dust to settle. They were already staking their claim. My sorrow was instantly replaced by icy, calculated alertness. I left the cemetery not as a widow seeking comfort, but as an opponent. What had Ethan done to protect me? The will reading was held in a polished, soundproof room. It felt less like a grieving ritual and more like a corporate execution. The Coles were a united front. I was an outsider. The lawyer, all dry professional neutrality, laid out the documents, but the verdict was already written on Eleanor's face. The lawyer cleared his throat and delivered the blow. Due to a prenuptial agreement and a rigid family clause, the majority of Ethan's substantial assets revert to the Cole family trust. I was allocated a minimal financial recognition, a pittance. Just enough to silence a weak challenge, but not enough to build a future. As the lawyer droned on, Eleanor leaned in, her eyes shining with malicious triumph. She whispered, low enough only for me to hear, "Bloodline always wins, Maria." Always, that sentence was the gasoline. My initial shock dissipated. It wasn't about law, it was a personal declaration of war. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't even correct her. I simply absorbed the insult, letting the cold fury settle into my core. They wanted me gone, weak, and quiet. But they had just given me something more valuable than money, a purpose, forged in fire. I knew the ambush wasn't over. The legal documents were just the beginning. What would they seize next? I bypassed Eleanor and walked straight to Howard. My voice was low, devoid of tears. The sales rep training kicked in, demand the explanation, control the negotiation. Howard, I said. I demand a full explanation for this illegal invasion. What exactly is the basis for this eviction? Howard didn't even adjust his tie. He gave me the look he usually reserved for low-level corporate rivals, patronizing and utterly dismissive. "Maria," he sighed, as if explaining gravity to a child. "You know the will. You know the trust. Don't make this uglier than it has to be," I pushed back. "The will grants me a minor stipend, not the house. The house was in both our names." He shook his head. A gesture of cold pity. "We amended the deed years ago, Maria. This property belongs to the Cole bloodline." That's when he delivered the final, crushing line, the one meant to shatter my self-worth entirely. He leaned in, lowering his voice. He said, with chilling clarity, "You were temporary. An attachment. A phase. Your tour of duty here is over." I felt the fire rush to my face. Not shame, but pure, unadulterated hatred. They saw me as a replaceable business expense. Ethan hadn't just died, his memory was being audited and then discarded by his own blood. I shifted my stance, moving from negotiation to analysis. I had my explanation. Now I needed my evidence. My pain was a liability. My composure was an asset. I let my inner sales rep take the final call, win the war, not the argument. Howard, seeing my silence, misinterpreted it as surrender. He turned back to the movers, believing he had crushed the threat. He didn't know that my anger had solidified into a single, terrifying question. What exactly did Ethan know that led them to act so ruthlessly? I had to get inside their operation, their paperwork. The time for talking was over. The time for collecting evidence had begun. I bypassed Eleanor and walked straight to Howard. My voice was low, devoid of tears. The sales rep training kicked in, demand the explanation, control the negotiation. "Howard," I said. "I demand a full explanation for this illegal invasion. What exactly is the basis for this eviction?" Howard didn't even adjust his tie. He gave me the look he usually reserved for low-level corporate rivals, patronizing and utterly dismissive. "Maria," he sighed, as if explaining gravity to a child. "You know the will. You know the trust. Don't make this uglier than it has to be," I pushed back. "The will grants me a minor stipend, not the house. The house was in both our names." He shook his head. A gesture of cold pity. "We amended the deed years ago, Maria. This property belongs to the Cole bloodline." That's when he delivered the final, crushing line, the one meant to shatter my self-worth entirely. He leaned in, lowering his voice. He said, with chilling clarity, "You were temporary. An attachment. A phase. Your tour of duty here is over." I felt the fire rush to my face. Not shame, but pure, unadulterated hatred. They saw me as a replaceable business expense. Ethan hadn't just died, his memory was being audited and then discarded by his own blood. I shifted my stance, moving from negotiation to analysis. I had my explanation. Now I needed my evidence. My pain was a liability. My composure was an asset. I let my inner sales rep take the final call, win the war, not the argument. Howard, seeing my silence, misinterpreted it as surrender. He turned back to the movers, believing he had crushed the threat. He didn't know that my anger had solidified into a single, terrifying question. What exactly did Ethan know that led them to act so ruthlessly? I had to get inside their operation, their paperwork. The time for talking was over. The time for collecting evidence had begun. I bypassed Eleanor and walked straight to Howard. My voice was low, devoid of tears. The sales rep training kicked in, demand the explanation, control the negotiation. "Howard," I said. "I demand a full explanation for this illegal invasion. What exactly is the basis for this eviction?" Howard didn't even adjust his tie. He gave me the look he usually reserved for low-level corporate rivals, patronizing and utterly dismissive. "Maria," he sighed, as if explaining gravity to a child. "You know the will. You know the trust. Don't make this uglier than it has to be." I pushed back. the will grants me a minor stipend, not the house. The house was in both our names. He shook his head. A gesture of cold pity. We amended the deed years ago, Maria. This property belongs to the Cole bloodline. That's when he delivered the final, crushing line, the one meant to shatter my self-worth entirely. He leaned in, lowering his voice. He said, with chilling clarity, you were temporary. An attachment. A phase. Your tour of duty here is over. I felt the fire rush to my face. Not shame, but pure, unadulterated hatred. They saw me as a replaceable business expense. Ethan hadn't just died. His memory was being audited and then discarded by his own blood. I shifted my stance, moving from negotiation to analysis. I had my explanation. Now I needed my evidence. My pain was a liability. My composure was an asset. I let my inner sales rep take the final call, win the war, not the argument. Howard, seeing my silence, misinterpreted it as surrender. He turned back to the movers, believing he had crushed the threat. He didn't know that my anger had solidified into a single, terrifying question. What exactly did Ethan know that led them to act so ruthlessly? I had to get inside their operation. Their paperwork. The time for talking was over. The time for collecting. Evidence had begun. Howard's words, you were temporary, didn't break me. They incinerated the last remnants of my grief. The pain was gone, replaced by a solid, diamond-hard core of purpose. I stopped yelling, stopped shaking. I was an empty vessel, but ready to be filled with the cold logic of revenge. As a sales representative, I knew, to win the deal, you must know your client's deepest weakness. My clients were now the Coles. I studied every face, every smirk, memorizing every insult. They were so confident, so arrogant. They left their flanks exposed. Eleanor's weakness, her pride and social image. She couldn't tolerate public scandal. Her elegance was her armor, but it was also a fragile shell. I logged the way she meticulously ensured the movers didn't scratch the antique floor. Perfectionism is a target. Howard's weakness, control and legacy. He valued the Cole name and corporate power above all else. His trust was in documents, not people. He was a corporate man, which meant the only language he understood was legal and financial consequence. Christopher and David were peripheral. Christopher showed a flicker of discomfort, a potential crack in the facade. David was just arrogant. I logged the crack. Dividing the opposition is sales 101. I wouldn't need to fight them all at once. My composure wasn't surrender. It was silent defiance. They mistook my control for weakness. They mistook my silence for acceptance. My silence was the sound of an executed plan being formed. I walked out of the house, leaving the drama behind. They had stolen a home and desecrated a memory. I swore an internal vow. I would reclaim what was mine and shatter their fragile empire in the process. This wasn't revenge for Ethan's money. This was revenge for his honor and for my self-respect. Howard's words, you were temporary, didn't break me. They incinerated the last remnants of my grief. The pain was gone, replaced by a solid, diamond-hard core of purpose. I stopped yelling, stopped shaking. I was an empty vessel, but ready to be filled with the cold logic of revenge. As a sales representative, I knew, to win the deal, you must know your client's deepest weakness. My clients were now the Coles. I studied every face, every smirk, memorizing every insult. They were so confident, so arrogant, they left their flanks exposed. Eleanor's weakness, her pride and social image. She couldn't tolerate public scandal. Her elegance was her armor, but it was also a fragile shell. I logged the way she meticulously ensured the movers didn't scratch the antique floor. Perfectionism is a target. Howard's weakness, control and legacy. He valued the Cole name and corporate power above all else. His trust was in documents, not people. He was a corporate man, which meant the only language he understood was legal and financial consequence. Christopher and David were peripheral. Christopher showed a flicker of discomfort, a potential crack in the facade. David was just arrogant. I logged the crack. Dividing the opposition is sales 101. I wouldn't need to fight them all at once. My composure wasn't surrender, it was silent defiance. They mistook my control for weakness. They mistook my silence for acceptance. My silence was the sound of an executed plan being formed. I walked out of the house, leaving the drama behind. They had stolen a home and desecrated a memory. I swore an internal vow. I would reclaim what was mine and shatter their fragile empire in the process. This wasn't revenge for Ethan's money. This was revenge for his honor and for my self-respect. That's how long it took to get the documents from Charles Peton and build my case. I walked into the Cole boardroom without knocking. Howard, Eleanor, Christopher, and David sat frozen. I put my briefcase on the mahogany table. The widow was now a predator. Howard was the first to speak. His face was thunderous. "Get out. You have no right to be here." I offered my rehearsed, professional smile. "On the contrary, Howard," I said, my voice level. "I'm here to close a deal. One you cannot afford to reject." I slid the file across the table. It contained everything: altered property deeds, fraudulent trust amendments, and evidence of insider trading. The documents showed the Cole dynasty built their wealth on a foundation of calculated criminal deception. The shock was palpable. They thought they were safe. Ethan, I explained, was preparing to blow the whistle. He left me his evidence. My gentle husband was going to expose his family. His death may have been natural, but my new purpose was absolutely unnatural. Eleanor, seeing the threat to her social standing, tried manipulation. "Maria, darling, don't do this. Think of Ethan's memory." I laughed, a cold, short sound. "You erased his memory when you tossed his photos. This is for his integrity, not your sympathy." I delivered the ultimatum. "My attorney holds the originals. You have one option to avoid public SEC investigations and felony fraud charges. You will sign over every Cole asset Ethan ever owned to me. Every stock, every deed, and the entirety of the house." Howard's mask finally broke. He saw the end of his legacy, the end of his control. He stared at the documents, defeated. The dynasty was crumbling, not from an outside attack, but from a flaw Ethan had exposed. I was just the messenger, and the executioner. "Sign these new agreements," I finished, my voice like ice. "Or I call the SEC. The choice is yours. The deadline is now." Would Howard Cole, the proud patriarch, sacrifice his corporate empire to protect his family name? His decision would seal their fate. The silence was shattered by Christopher and David arguing over the documents. They were terrified. Howard just saw his life's work hanging by a single, vengeful thread. He had two options: ruin the Cole name, or surrender his son's assets to the temporary woman. With a shaking hand, Howard signed. It wasn't just ink on paper, it was the formal acknowledgement that I had won and he had failed. Eleanor let out a small, strangled gasp. They had underestimated the power of the sales representative scorned. I methodically collected the signed documents, checking every page. No errors. No loopholes. The deal was closed. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I simply sealed the briefcase. Victory in this business is always quiet and professional. I looked directly at Eleanor, her eyes now pools of impotent rage. I gave her the final, professional assessment of her behavior. "You didn't need to change the locks, Eleanor," I said. "You should have changed your manners. Your aesthetic was flawed." I turned my back on the stunned, defeated Coles. No hesitation. No final insults. My victory spoke for itself. I walked out of the boardroom the way I walked into my sales calls, confident, prepared, and totally in control. They were left in their velvet tomb, the masters of an enterprise now seriously compromised. Howard had his legacy, but it was tarnished, perhaps fatally. I felt no joy, only a chilling satisfaction. I had honored Ethan by exposing their criminal hypocrisy. I used the new key on the old lock. It turned smoothly. The house was now legally mine, a victory not of money, but of justice over arrogance. I didn't move back in immediately. I stood on the porch, realizing my revenge was complete. But was my story? Ethan's assets were protected. The Coles were wounded. But in a family dynasty, vengeance is rarely a one-and-done deal. They had lost the battle, but would they regroup and try to destroy me by other means? The Cole dynasty never truly surrenders. Charles Petton, Ethan's partner, was my last hope. We met in a public but discreet spot. He was nervous, glancing constantly at the door. I started with a simple truth: the Coles are erasing me. I need to know why Ethan was preparing to leave them. Charles didn't deny it. He confirmed Ethan had discovered the fraudulent trust amendments years ago. Ethan couldn't live with the deceit, Charles admitted. Ethan had been quietly gathering evidence to expose the insider trading that underpinned Howard's entire career. Did he leave anything for me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Charles reached into his jacket pocket. He placed a small, encrypted drive on the table. He wanted you protected. Maria. He called it the final inventory. Charles's eyes were firm. I'll give you the key, but you have to promise me you will only target Howard and Eleanor. Not the firm, not the innocent employees. I didn't hesitate. I'm a sales representative, Charles. I only target the decision makers. You have my word. I revealed my plan, using the fraud evidence not for public exposure initially, but as leverage to reclaim Ethan's assets. Charles admired the strategy. It was a clean, surgical strike, exactly the kind of negotiation the Coles would understand. Holding that tiny drive, I felt the shift. The balance of power was finally equalized. My self-worth was restored with every incriminating file it held. I wasn't the grieving widow anymore, I was the guardian of the truth. Armed with the ultimate threat, I spent the next 48 hours studying the ledgers. I needed to know the fraud better than Howard himself. Preparation is the currency of the professional. The meeting with the Coles wasn't a debate. It was going to be a presentation. My final sales pitch. The Coles had drawn first blood by trying to erase me. Now, I was armed, informed, and ready to show them what a true tactical counterattack looks like. They expected tears and pleas. They were about to get a cold, calculated ultimatum. Who would break first when the truth was laid bare? Charles provided the decryption key. The drive wasn't just a file dump, it was a meticulously organized digital ledger. Ethan had built a case, not just a warning. We worked for hours, connecting the dots between Cole Industries' official books and Ethan's shadow accounting. Charles confirmed the trust amendments were fabricated. Howard had leveraged a minor technicality and forged the final signatures after Ethan signed the preliminary papers. The Cole family hadn't just disinherited me, they had stolen from their own son. This confirmed the depth of their malice. The insider trading was vast. Millions skimmed off legitimate deals, laundered through obscure subsidiaries. Howard's entire empire was a house of cards. This isn't just a legal battle, Maria, Charles whispered, his voice pale. This is SEC territory. Prison time. We had the digital evidence, but in high-stakes corporate fraud, you need a physical anchor. A document they couldn't deny. I sifted through Ethan's personal journals, looking for a clue, a code, anything that pointed to the original signed will. I found a financial statement from a shell corporation. Next to Ethan's signature, I noticed a tiny, almost invisible UV ink mark. Charles brought a small UV pen light. The mark glowed, revealing the coordinates for a safe deposit box outside of Cole's jurisdiction. Ethan hadn't just left me data. He had anticipated his family's every move, including their attempt to seize all assets. The safe deposit box held the original, untainted will, securing all assets, including the house, directly to me. Why keep it secret, even from me? I asked Charles. He replied, to protect you, Maria. He knew the Coles would come for the document. Ethan's final act of love wasn't a gift of wealth, it was a strategically placed countermine to his family's treachery. The existence of the original will nullify the fraudulent amendments, but the SEC evidence was the real leverage. I decided to use the fraud charges to force them to sign the asset transfer before revealing the original will. I secured the safe deposit key. The final pieces were in place. I changed out of my work clothes and put on my war attire. I was going to walk into the Cole boardroom not as the grieving widow, but as the architect of their financial ruin. I looked in the mirror. My eyes were clear, my focus absolute. The fear was gone. Only the cold, hard drive of vengeance remained. The Coles thought they were powerful because of their name. They forgot that information is the only true currency. Charles, visibly shaken but proud, gave me a nod. They'll never see you coming, Maria. You are the perfect Trojan horse. I knew then that my identity as the temporary sales rep was the biggest advantage I had. 2 piles of documents. The first, the SEC fraud evidence, the Iron Fist. The second, the asset transfer agreements, the velvet glove. They wouldn't know the velvet glove was only there to disguise the damage the Iron Fist was about to inflict. I had the legal, the financial, and the moral high ground. I looked at the safe deposit key, the final safeguard Ethan left me. The Coles were about to learn that money and bloodline meant nothing against truth and preparation. I was walking into the lion's den, but I was carrying all the poison. I knew the end result. The question was how violently they would break. I had no doubt. The Coles' arrogance was about to cost them everything, starting with their composure. Ethan's plan wasn't just about the assets. I suspect there was another layer to the fraud, something Howard was desperate to hide. The documents confirmed the insider trading. But what if the crime was deeper, related to Ethan's own death? I closed my eyes, remembering Ethan's advice. Always have an exit strategy, Maria. Mine involved a press release and the SEC on speed dial. I opened my eyes. Time to walk in and deliver the most important pitch of my life. The pitch for revenge. If I failed, I lost everything, including my freedom. If I succeeded, the Coles would lose their kingdom. The stakes couldn't be higher. My heart was a steady drumbeat of vengeance. I was finally ready to face the music, and make sure the Coles danced to my tune. The meeting was set. The ultimatum was prepared. Would Howard crack immediately, or would he try one last, desperate maneuver to save his empire? The final move was about to be played. Get ready, because what happened in that boardroom was the ultimate corporate takedown. Howard had signed, trading Ethan's assets for the silence of the SEC files. The immediate crisis was averted for the Coles, but the clock was ticking. I stood up, adjusting my suit. The meeting was over. The transaction was complete. I didn't owe them silence. I owed them consequence. I sent a single, coded text message to Charles Peton and my lawyer. The message was simple: execute the final step. This was the pre-authorized instruction to file the complete SEC complaint. Howard thought he bought my silence. He only bought my compliance on the asset transfer. The fraud complaint was filed the moment he signed. They wanted a clean deal, but they forgot I specialize in the unspoken clauses of vengeance. I have my property, Howard, I said, my voice steady. And I have the truth. Keep your distance. The real battle is just beginning. I left them to their sinking ship. My role as the grieving widow was finally over. The sales rep was now the architect of ruin. The house was mine. The assets were mine. But the Coles were not done fighting. What would they sacrifice next to survive the SEC? I knew the Coles wouldn't surrender quietly. Eleanor's life was built on social facade. So, I went where her defeat would cause the most public pain, her charity gala. Eleanor was on stage, accepting an award, her smile brittle. The crowd was the jury I needed to sway. Her eyes locked onto mine. The brittle smile evaporated, replaced by raw, venomous fury. She hadn't seen me coming. She dropped the microphone. Security. Get that woman out of here. Her composure was gone, and the audience was watching. Eleanor didn't wait for security. She charged me, ignoring Howard's frantic pleas. She decided to use her last weapon, public humiliation. You cheap gold digger, she spat. You ruined my son's final moments. You're a parasite on the Cole name. I didn't flinch. While she was screaming, I took a bundle of paper from my bag, not the SEC files, but the Cole Industries bank statements. I tossed the bundle into the air. They fluttered down, revealing massive transfers to Eleanor's personal foundation. A parasite? I asked the room. These are just a few statements showing millions diverted from the company into her charity. The crowd noise swelled. I hadn't revealed the fraud, just the hypocrisy. Eleanor's face was the color of dust. She lunged, not to hurt me, but to grab the papers. A primal, desperate shriek tore from her. The facade had shattered entirely. Howard finally reached her, pulling her away. He was dragging his wife, the elegant Eleanor Cole. Out in total, public disgrace. The Coles cared only for their image. My revenge wasn't just taking their money, it was destroying the one thing they valued more, their perceived purity. I hadn't made an SEC filing announcement. I'd simply planted the seed. The social ruin would precede the legal one. I left the gala, letting the rumors, and the bank statements, do the heavy lifting. I didn't need to say a word, the Coles had done the rest. The next day, every major society column ran the story. The Cole name was officially toxic. Howard didn't call. He couldn't. He knew that the moment he fought the asset transfer, the full SEC complaint would hit. He was trapped between protecting his wife's reputation and protecting his corporation. He chose the corporation. I poured a glass of wine. The house was clean, quiet, and finally mine. I raised the glass to Ethan's memory. My revenge was complete, but hollow. It had brought justice, but it couldn't bring Ethan back. Eleanor's breakdown was tragic, but it was a tragedy born of her own greed. I had no pity. I only saw the closing of a painful chapter. The true Cole weakness wasn't the fraud, but the certainty that their money and power made them untouchable. I began to unpack the boxes that the Coles had dumped on the lawn. Not Ethan's possessions, but mine. The focus shifted from revenge to rebuilding. I was a widow, yes, but I was also an independent woman, a survivor, but the story of Cole versus Maria wasn't entirely over. A certified letter arrived, not from Howard, but from Christopher Cole's attorney. The letter wasn't a threat. It was an offer to cooperate with the SEC, and a cryptic warning about Howard's deeper secrets. Had Christopher finally broken rank? Was there something even more sinister lurking beneath the financial fraud? My revenge was complete, but the story of the Cole dynasty's secrets was not. What did Christopher know about Ethan's death? I hadn't expected the letter from Christopher's lawyer to lead to him appearing on my doorstep. He looked defeated, completely unlike the smug brother I remembered. "Maria," he said, his voice flat. "I know I have no right to be here. But I read the letter from my lawyer. I need to talk about Ethan." I let him in, but I kept my distance. Trust was a currency the Cole family had defaulted on long ago. "Howard sent you to test the waters?" I asked. Christopher shook his head. "No. Howard isn't speaking to anyone. Maria, I'm here because I know the full truth." He took a deep, ragged breath. He started talking about the insider trading, but I cut him off. "I know about the fraud, Christopher. I already filed the SEC complaint." He flinched. "Then you know Howard's willing to sacrifice me and David to save himself." "But Maria, Ethan's death wasn't natural." The words hit me like a physical blow. The silence in the room was absolute. My cold, hard purpose had been about money and honor. This was different. "What did you say?" I whispered. My voice was suddenly fragile. Christopher leaned forward. "It was the medication, Maria. Howard tampered with it." "Why?" I demanded, the cold logic returning. "Ethan was just going to leave. Why kill him?" Christopher's eyes filled with shame. "Ethan was transferring all the fraud documents to an external server. Howard panicked. He thought Ethan was going to destroy the whole family, and you helped him?" I challenged. Christopher violently shook his head. "No. I cleaned up the office afterward. I saw the empty bottles. I found the note. He told me Howard had switched Ethan's heart medication with something that mimicked a natural heart attack. Premeditated murder. My revenge for the money was complete. My revenge for the murder was just beginning. The stakes had been raised to an unimaginable level. "Where is the note, Christopher?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. The game was no longer corporate, it was criminal. Christopher had the final piece of the puzzle. But would he truly betray his father and risk everything to help me seek justice? Christopher was taking the ultimate risk. He knew this confession would ruin him, but he was choosing truth over bloodline. He handed me a sealed envelope. "It's the note, Maria," he whispered. "Howard's handwriting." He outlines how he altered the medication. Howard emerged, flanked by lawyers, still radiating arrogance. He saw me, then Christopher next to me. His face went white. He glared at Christopher. "What are you doing? Get away from that extortionist." He still thought I was just after the money. I ignored Howard. I walked past the reporters and directly up to the man waiting near the exit, a detective I had contacted through Charles Peton. I handed the envelope to the detective. "This is the note, detective. It concerns the death of my husband, Ethan Cole." "It's a confession," the detective nodded and raised his hand. Two uniformed officers immediately approached Howard. The murmurs in the hall erupted into chaos. Howard tried to protest, but the words caught in his throat. He understood instantly. The SEC was the distraction, the murder was the trap. I watched as the handcuffs clicked shut on Howard Cole's wrists. The proud, untouchable patriarch was being led away in shame, not for money, but for taking my husband's life. His eyes met mine one last time. They held no hatred, only the bleak realization of total defeat. Christopher stood alone, watching his father leave. He had sacrificed his reputation and safety, but he had finally done the right thing for Ethan. I gave him a small, sincere nod. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement of his courage. He deserved his own quiet redemption. The reporters surged toward me. I said only one sentence, ensuring the focus remained where it belonged. My husband, Ethan Cole, did not die of natural causes. He was murdered. And today, justice has been served. My journey of vengeance was complete. I had reclaimed my home, honored my husband, and brought down a king who thought he was God. The cold fury was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of finality. The price of their arrogance had been paid in full. The Cole dynasty was destroyed, financially and criminally, but for me, the next chapter wasn't about revenge, but about building a new life. Could I ever truly escape the shadow of the Cole family, or would their legacy of deceit haunt my new beginning? The story continues in the epilogue. The headlines were brutal. Cole Industries collapses amid fraud and murder charges. The SEC investigation expanded rapidly after Howard's arrest. The public humiliation was complete. The company that had stood for a century was dismantled within months. Eleanor, stripped of her foundation and her social standing, sold the mansion. The jewels went first. She was just another disgraced wife of a convict. I felt no pity. She had spent a lifetime judging me. Her ending was merely the logical conclusion of her own arrogance. Christopher and David were forced to testify against their father. They pleaded ignorance to the murder and received minor penalties for the financial fraud. Their lives were ruined. But they were free. Christopher, I believe, found a sliver of peace by choosing truth over family duty. Howard Cole was convicted of manslaughter and corporate fraud. He received a lengthy sentence. The silence of the prison cell was his new boardroom. He lost the money, the power, and the freedom he so cherished. The pride that blinded him finally consumed him whole. The house, Ethan's house, was finally mine. I changed the locks, repainted the walls, and threw out every reminder of the Coles. It was no longer a tomb for my grief, but a foundation for my future. A simple, honest life bought with sharp wits and cold resolve. I kept only one photograph, Ethan smiling, completely unaware of the darkness his family hid. My vengeance had brought him the justice he deserved. I finally allowed myself to grieve the man, not the loss of the family name. I used the settlement money and the asset knowledge to start my own consulting firm. I specialized in corporate litigation defense. I was the perfect consultant. I knew how the criminals thought, because I had hunted the best of them. The drama was over. My days were filled with strategy, not suspicion. I had exchanged the gilded cage of the Cole dynasty for true, earned freedom. The only thing I fought for now was my client's legal protection, never again for a place I didn't truly belong. That's the end of the Cole saga. The lesson? In a family revenge story, the greatest weapon isn't rage, but the cold, calculated execution of a plan. They tried to erase me, but they only revealed the truth about themselves. I was just the messenger of their downfall. Vengeance is a double-edged sword. It cost me sleep and peace for months, but it delivered justice for the man I loved. I would never seek revenge again, but I will never regret the time I spent dismantling the empire built on Ethan's pain. I boxed up Ethan's briefcase, the same one Howard tried to seize. I kept the house and the financial stability, but I let go of the pain. I was no longer defined by my relationship with Ethan or my hatred for his family. My identity was now mine to forge. If the Coles had simply been kind, would have walked away quietly. But they chose war, and I was the professional they should have feared. This whole saga was a reminder, never underestimate the quiet one. They have the most to lose, and the most calculated will to win. So, what do you think of my revenge plan? Was justice truly served, or did I become just as ruthless as the Coles? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories about how the seemingly powerless take down the Titans. I received one last email from Charles Petton. He resigned from Cole Industries and was starting fresh. Our brief, tactical alliance was over, replaced by mutual respect for the strategy. He included a brief message: "You taught me that sometimes, the best defense is a perfect defense. Good luck, Maria." I meticulously deleted every single file related to the Cole family, the banking details, the trust documents, the SEC complaint drafts. No loose ends remained. My lawyer warned me about future retaliation, but the Coles had nothing left to fight with. Their ammunition was spent. I planted a small sapling in the garden where Ethan used to read. It was a physical commitment to the future, a sign that life could flourish again. The past was paid for. The present was quiet. The future felt unwritten, full of possibilities that weren't tainted by Cole money. My new career started with a bang. My first major client came to me because they heard I was the person who took down the Cole empire single-handedly. That's the legacy of my revenge, a reputation built on the most brutal of corporate battles. A reputation I earned. It wasn't the life Ethan and I planned, but it was a life of honesty, justice, and self-respect. A true victory over inherited arrogance. The house had finally settled into a comfortable silence. The ghost of Cole arrogance was banished. I was sorting through Ethan's books, a task I had dreaded for months. The physical act of cleaning became a spiritual cleansing. I was no longer the widow of a Cole, I was just Maria. I had won everything I set out for, but victory had left its mark. The ruthlessness I embraced was necessary, yet I knew it cost a piece of my former self. My compassion had been replaced by cold logic. But without that armor, I would have been destroyed. It was the price of survival. What the Coles tried to take, my dignity and my future, they inadvertently fortified. I emerged with a resilience I never knew I possessed. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. My business was growing, founded on the principle that the truth always finds a way out. I wrote a letter to Ethan, telling him everything, the fraud, the SEC, Christopher's bravery, and Howard's downfall. A final debriefing for my love. I folded it, placed it in one of his favorite books. The closure wasn't from the law, it was from the quiet acknowledgement of a promise kept. Charles Peton, my reluctant ally, opened his own ethical investment firm. He named it The Inventory. A subtle, shared joke we never spoke aloud. It was a small detail, but it proved that even in the most toxic environments, some integrity can survive and rebuild. I officially reverted to my maiden name. The Cole name was a badge of shame, a symbol of everything I fought against. I finally severed the last tie. Maria. That was my identity. Stronger, smarter, and infinitely more capable than the woman who married into that corrupted dynasty, my new purpose was clear, using my intimate knowledge of high-level corruption to help others fight back. It wasn't revenge, but preemptive defense. I was building a career on the principle that no one is truly untouchable. The sun set on my quiet victory. It was a victory not televised, not celebrated on the society pages, but deeply felt within. I had avenged my husband and found myself in the process. This was the true, unforeseen dividend of my family revenge story. We've covered everything from the deception to the final justice. But I want to hear from you. What do you think was the Cole family's biggest mistake? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and remember, karma doesn't always wait for the next life. My new office wasn't in the Cole skyscraper. It was smaller, quieter, and every lease payment was mine alone. I called the firm Phoenix Litigation. It symbolized rising from the ashes of my past. My focus shifted entirely from revenge to justice, providing defense to those wrongly accused by corporate giants. My first client was a whistleblower who faced destruction from a former competitor of Cole Industries. I knew their playbook by heart. We won easily. The victory felt purer than the Cole settlement. It was justice for a stranger, a clean transaction of integrity. I taught my team that the key to any legal fight isn't just law, it's psychology. Know what your opponent values most. And use that to your advantage. The Coles valued reputation more than money, and money more than freedom. That hierarchy was the flaw that brought them down. One afternoon, I saw David Cole, Ethan's younger brother, working as a delivery driver. He looked thin, burdened, and utterly unremarkable. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no hatred, just a shared understanding of the Cole family disaster. We both kept walking. David was a footnote in the saga. He was guilty only of silent compliance, yet he lost everything. A casualty of his father's blinding pride. That encounter reinforced my belief: my vengeance was not excessive. It was a force required to break a generational curse. I spent time and money on quality, not Cole money, but money I earned. Every piece of furniture was a statement of independence. I learned that true security doesn't come from inherited wealth, but from the unshakable belief in your own capability. I changed my style. No more demure dresses. I wore sharp, powerful suits. The woman who emerged from the fire was a force, not a forgotten widow. Ethan would have been proud of the justice, but I think he'd be prouder of the woman who refused to be defined by her suffering. Many ask if I regret the vengeance. I don't. It was never about bitterness. It was about imposing a necessary order where chaos had reigned. My revenge was a surgical procedure. It removed the cancer of the Cole family from the world, allowing honest people to breathe again. There was a time when my hand trembled just signing the settlement papers. Now, every signature is firm, a mark of authority. I mastered my fear and used it. The greatest asset I gained from the Coles was not the house, but the unwavering confidence in my ability to execute. I found an old, faded brochure for Cole Industries' initial public offering. A reminder of the glamorous facade that concealed the rot beneath. I tossed it without a second thought. My new foundation wasn't built on history or inherited names, it was built on hard-won truth. My future is bright, not because of the money I gained, but because of the battles I fought and won on my own terms. I no longer walk with my head down. I walk like a woman who knows her worth and is ready for the next challenge. Christopher, I heard, was working a non-profit, dedicating his life to combating corporate corruption. A strange, circuitous path to redemption. He didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. But his courage ensured my husband's murderer was caught. That was a form of closure we both shared. The sun set on Phoenix litigation. I left the office, not to retreat into grief, but to enjoy a quiet, well-earned evening. This was the true victory. Not the wealth, but the simple ability to control my own narrative, free from the Coles drama. I often walk through the garden now. The roses Ethan loved are thriving. The house is no longer a trophy, it's a living, breathing home. The air here is cleaner. The foundations are solid. And the only inheritance I care about is the memory of a good man, not a bad name. My phone is quiet. No desperate pleas, no veiled threats. The silence is golden. The debt of the Cole family has been settled. I moved on, not by forgetting, but by turning the pain into purpose. That is the ultimate strategy in any family feud, so, this is where the story of the Cole saga truly ends. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, unshakable confidence. I hope my story empowers you. Remember that even when the odds are stacked, smart planning is stronger than inherited power. And as for me, the new chapter is still being written. It's filled with late nights, legal briefs, and the occasional reminder that I built this, brick by calculated brick. I have everything I need. Justice. Peace. And a strong, independent identity. The final balance sheet is positive. Now, tell me, what is the one thing you would never sacrifice for power, and why? Let me know. We've reached the end of the Cole saga. But before we finish, I want to share the hardest truth. Revenge changes you, not just your target. I had to become ruthless, meticulous, and cold. I spent a year walking in the dark, but that darkness taught me how to see the shadows. The constant warfare, the financial maneuvering, the social dismantling, it was exhausting. The Coles nearly won simply because I got tired of fighting. If you seek justice against a powerful foe, remember this: your patience must outlast their privilege. That is the secret weapon. Howard's ultimate flaw wasn't criminality, it was his belief in his own exceptionalism. He thought the rules were for everyone else. Arrogance isn't power, it's a giant, flashing target. When people feel untouchable, that's when they make the dumbest, most incriminating mistakes. Ethan was the only truly good person in that dynasty. He suffered because he tried to challenge the family system. He paid the ultimate price for integrity. This saga taught me that family is a choice. My true family became those who helped me, Charles, the detective, not those who shared corrupted blood. I built Phoenix Litigation not just for money, but to create a force that prevents this kind of corporate bullying. My purpose is now my shield. My revenge didn't bring Ethan back, but it ensured his death had meaning. That meaning is a professional legacy of justice. The greatest victory was personal. I faced the system, I beat the greed, and I walked away clean, stronger, and fundamentally changed for the better. I reclaimed my identity. That is a kind of power no one can ever take from you, not even a ruthless, multi-million-dollar dynasty. If you are facing a massive injustice, don't react immediately. Sit. Wait. Observe. The villain will always reveal their weakness. Your emotional pain is valid, but your cold, calculated action is what delivers justice. Channel the rage, but don't let it drive the bus. That is my story. The end of my personal warfare and the beginning of my true life. Thank you for listening to the final reflection on the Cole family saga. My hope is that no one else has to walk this path, but if you do, I hope you walk it with courage and a flawless strategy. Before you go, let's talk about value. The Coles valued status above humanity. That value system dictated every destructive decision they made. What you truly value, your integrity, your loved ones, is the key to surviving and overcoming any obstacle. Guard your values fiercely. I still miss Ethan every day. But the hole he left is no longer filled with bitter rage, it's filled with the satisfaction of having honored his memory. That peace is the real treasure, far more valuable than the settlement or the house. It's the soul of my quiet victory. Many of you asked how I remained so calm. I pre-grieved. I wrote out every possible move they could make and prepared 5 counters for each. By the time the final confrontation arrived, it was just the execution of a well-rehearsed script. Emotion was the enemy of the mission. Eleanor's fate was perhaps the most tragic consequence. She lost her identity entirely. When the charity closed, her entire self-worth vanished. It was a sad reminder: never tie your value to external, brittle things like status or an inherited, hollow name. Returning to my career was the final step of healing. It was the proof that I was more than a victim. I was a professional strategist with a moral compass. My life is structured now, dedicated to stopping the precise abuses that nearly crushed me. The revenge became the revolution. Power isn't inherited, it's taken through smart decisions. The true power I gained wasn't monetary, it was the knowledge that I could survive anything. Never doubt your own ability to turn a crisis into an opportunity. The Cole crisis became my foundation for unshakable independence. I want to thank all of you who followed this story. Your support kept me accountable and reminded me that I was fighting for more than just myself. Sharing this saga was a final act of closure. It transformed private pain into a public lesson on ethical warfare. Ethan once told me, the best way to defeat a bully is to refuse to play their game. I played their game, yes, but I used their own rulebook against them. That's the subtlety of strategy. Always use the terrain, the rules, and the expectations of your enemy to spring the perfect trap. Today, My life is dedicated to ensuring that corporate power is always checked by justice. That is the new Cole legacy, authored by Maria. The scars remain, but they are reminders of my strength, not my failure. They are a testament to the fact that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous. So, final question, what is the greatest lesson you learned from the downfall of the Cole dynasty? Share your thoughts below. 2 years after the dust settled, my mornings are peaceful. No urgent, panicked emails. Just the sound of the birds and the smell of coffee. I appreciate the small things now. The quiet victory wasn't just about justice, it was about reclaiming the beautiful simplicity of life. I rediscovered my old love for painting. It requires focus and patience, the same skills needed for revenge, but the outcome is creation, not destruction. This creative process is a form of healing. It's proof that my mind is free from the poisonous Cole strategy sessions. I made a new friend, an artist who lives down the street. Our conversations are about color palettes and local politics, not corporate espionage. It's a connection based on honesty and mutual interest, a refreshing change from the Cole world where every relationship was a transactional asset. The financial settlement was essential, but the real win was taking control of the money myself. No joint accounts, no Cole accountants. I track every cent. It's a habit born from suspicion, but it's become a ritual of self-reliance. My security is my own making. I realized a month ago that I hadn't checked the prison news or any articles about the Cole family in months. The obsession finally died. My energy is now invested entirely in the future, not in the ruin of the past. That severance was the final, liberating act of revenge. I raised a glass of cheap, honest wine, the opposite of the vintage Cole reserved for himself, and toasted Ethan. To justice, my love. And to a world where simple truth is stronger than inherited power. The moment was quiet, profound, and entirely mine. I went to a local jazz club. It was loud, chaotic, and completely free of the Cole family's rigid pretension. I didn't need to dress up or network. I just listened to the music. That is what freedom sounds like when you've been fighting a gilded tyranny. So, what did I learn about family revenge? That the key isn't how hard you hit, but how long you can wait for the perfect moment. The longer the wait, the more meticulous the planning, the more devastating the final blow when it finally lands. I no longer look over my shoulder. The fear of retaliation is gone. Not because I forgive, but because I know the Coles are truly powerless now. The only people who scare me now are my clients' opponents, and I have a clear, legal path to defeat them. The game is honest, the sapling I planted is growing strong. It reminds me that growth requires deep roots and careful tending. A metaphor for my own life renewed. My legacy is not the downfall of others, but the strength of the new foundation I built on the moral and financial ruins. I can look at my wedding photos now and smile. The focus is on Ethan's joy, not the lurking shadow of his father. The poison is finally gone. The memory of Ethan is a blessing, not a burden. My revenge didn't erase the pain. But it purified the memory. Never let anyone convince you that money can't buy happiness. It can't, but it can buy freedom from the people who abuse it. My financial independence wasn't about luxury, it was about building an unbreakable wall between myself and the entitlement of the 1%. Christopher. He sends me an annual holiday card. It's addressed to my maiden name. He's building his own quiet life. Our path to justice was a shared, silent one. It proved that even within the most corrupt families, a core of decency can sometimes break free. So, I recommend closing every chapter fully. Don't linger on the defeat, and don't obsess over the victory. The real prize is the blank page ahead. The next chapter is about Maria, the strategist, the survivor, the consultant. And that chapter is going to be a blockbuster. I close the book on vengeance, not with a triumphant shout, but with a quiet, firm thud. Mission accomplished. The power they tried to crush me with is now my greatest tool. It's the irony of the Cole story, they created their own downfall. The loneliness was real. But I found that being alone is far better than being surrounded by people who actively wish for your destruction. I built a fortress of self-respect. Now, if anyone wants in, they have to prove they are worthy of the woman who took down a dynasty. So, I wish you peace, strategy, and strength. Thank you for walking this road with me. My ultimate advice? Be the quiet one. Let your strategy be your voice. And never, ever let them forget what you can do when you are truly motivated. Now, for the final question, what simple, non-material thing did my story remind you to appreciate in your own life? Let me know in the comments. The final excerpt is essentially a concluding reflection, a call to action, like and subscribe, and a final question for the audience, typical of a summary section or epilogue. The most logical way to segment it for audience emotion is to separate the core lessons from the final sign-off and call to action. The Cole saga proves that no dynasty is too big to fail if their foundation is built on lies. Remember, strategy always beats arrogance. Your intellect is your weapon. Use it wisely. I hope my story has shown you the true meaning of calculated revenge. Before you click away, let's summarize the ultimate takeaways from the downfall of the Cole dynasty. These are the 5 rules I now live by. Don't think of this as revenge strategy, think of it as a blueprint for surviving powerful manipulation. Let's dive in. Lesson 1, outlast their privilege. Wealthy people are used to instant results. My greatest advantage was simply waiting for Howard to make a fatal error. Don't rush the process. When they see you aren't reacting, they become complacent. Complacency is your window. Lesson 2, paper trails never lie. In any corporate or family feud, gather every email, every receipt, every piece of irrefutable, cold evidence. Emotional arguments are noise. Legal documentation is a hammer. Howard's pride died the moment the SEC received my meticulously organized file. Lesson 3, identify your reluctant allies. In every bad situation, there are people who want out. Christopher and Charles didn't love me, but they hated Howard more. Find the crack in the facade. Use their self-interest as leverage. Remember, the enemy of your enemy is your temporary, valuable friend. Lesson 4, know their true currency. It wasn't money, it was reputation. Lesson 5, detach emotion from execution. Justice is a procedure, not a feeling. So, which of these 5 lessons is the most critical for your own life strategy? Tell me in the comments below.